Hey there. Tonight the journey begins with an invitation to one of the most exclusive and extraordinary events in the ancient world. A banquet hosted by a Roman emperor. This isn't about excess or scandal, but rather about understanding the elaborate social theatre that unfolded during these imperial dinners, the careful protocols that governed behaviour, the extraordinary foods that were served, and what these gatherings reveal about Roman culture, power and daily life at the highest levels of society. Imagine receiving an invitation to dine with the most powerful person in the known world, in a palace of unimaginable luxury, surrounded by the empire's elite, served foods from across 3 continents, entertained by the finest performers, navigating complex social protocols where every gesture carried meaning. This was the reality for the fortunate few who attended imperial banquets during the height of Roman power. Before settling in, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if this exploration into the hidden world of imperial Roman dining speaks to something within, and share in the comments where in the world this finds its audience, and what hour marks the clock. It's always remarkable to see how the rituals of power and hospitality from 2,000 years ago continue to fascinate. Now, dim the lights. Perhaps let a gentle sound fill the background, and let the story of a Roman emperor's banquet unfold at its own measured, deliberate pace. The Roman imperial banquet was far more than simply a meal. It was a carefully orchestrated display of power, wealth, and culture. It was a venue for political manoeuvring, for cementing alliances, for demonstrating favour or withdrawing it. It was theatre, with the emperor as lead actor and the guests as both audience and supporting cast. Understanding what happened at these banquets requires understanding Roman culture, politics, and the elaborate social codes that governed elite behaviour. The emperors who hosted these banquets range from the relatively modest Augustus, who preferred simpler entertainments, to figures like Nero or Elagabalus, whose banquets became legendary for their extravagance. Each emperor's personality shaped the character of their banquets, making some evenings exercises in restraint and culture, others displays of overwhelming luxury that bordered on the absurd. The guests who attended represented the pinnacle of Roman society: senators, successful generals, wealthy merchants, distinguished scholars, famous artists, foreign dignitaries, and imperial family members. Being invited was an honour that confirmed one's status. Being excluded sent equally clear messages about one's standing. The story tonight moves through the entire experience of attending an imperial banquet, from the moment the invitation arrived through the eventual departure in the early morning hours. It explores the physical spaces, the food and drink, the entertainment, the social dynamics, the protocols and etiquette, and what these extraordinary events reveal about Roman civilization at its height. The journey is detailed and immersive, recreating as much as possible what it felt like to be present at one of history's most exclusive dinner parties. The invitation to an imperial banquet arrived with ceremony appropriate to its significance. The emperor's messenger, often a freedman from the imperial household, or sometimes a low-ranking official, would appear at your home bearing the invitation. The messenger himself indicated the importance of the occasion through his bearing and the formality of his delivery. The invitation itself might be written on fine papyrus, or even on thin wood tablets covered with wax for writing. The wording was carefully chosen to indicate the nature of the event, and the emperor's regard for the recipient. A formal invitation might read, "The divine emperor requests the presence of your name at a banquet in the palace on the evening of date. Your attendance would honour the emperor and demonstrate your loyalty to Rome." The choice of words mattered enormously. An invitation that requested your presence was more formal than one that invited you. An invitation that mentioned demonstrating loyalty carried different implications than one emphasising the social pleasure of your company. Romans, attuned to subtle distinctions in language and protocol, would immediately understand the nuances. Receiving an invitation for the first time was a momentous occasion. It marked acceptance into the innermost circles of power. It confirmed that you had achieved a level of status that warranted imperial notice. For someone whose social position was uncertain or whose political fortunes were rising, that first invitation was validation that their efforts had succeeded. For established members of the elite, regular invitations were expected and their absence would be noted. A senator who had been attending imperial banquets regularly would become anxious if invitations ceased arriving, as this indicated falling from favour. The invitation system was thus a mechanism through which the emperor communicated approval or displeasure. The timing of the invitation mattered. Invitations delivered well in advance suggested a formal occasion where attendance of many distinguished guests was desired. Invitations arriving the same day, or even just hours before the banquet, suggested a more intimate gathering, or perhaps that you were replacing someone who had declined or become unavailable. Declining an imperial invitation was possible but delicate. Legitimate reasons included illness, family emergency, or prior religious obligations. Frivolous reasons or repeated declinations would be noted and could damage your relationship with the emperor. Some emperors were understanding about conflicts, others were not. The appropriate response to an invitation was to send a written acceptance back with a messenger, along with a small gift as a token of respect. This gift might be a book, a small artistic object, fine wine, or some other item that demonstrated taste and cultivation, without being so valuable as to seem like an attempt to buy favour. Upon receiving confirmation of attendance, you would begin preparations. These preparations were elaborate and time-consuming, reflecting the importance of the occasion. Everything from clothing to conversation topics to personal grooming required careful thought and planning. Consulting with friends who had attended imperial banquets previously was wise, particularly if this was your first time. Experienced courtiers could provide guidance about expectations, protocol, what to wear, what topics of conversation were currently in favour, which entertainments pleased the emperor, and countless other details that separated successful attendance from embarrassing mistakes. The days leading up to the banquet were filled with anticipation and anxiety in equal measure. The opportunity to dine with the emperor was thrilling. The potential for making a positive impression that could advance your career was exciting. But the risks were equally real. A social mistake, an ill-considered comment, offending another guest, all could damage your reputation and prospects. The preparation for attending an imperial banquet began hours before departure. Personal appearance was crucial, as it communicated respect for the emperor and the occasion, demonstrated your cultural sophistication, and displayed your wealth and status. Bathing was essential. Romans bathed regularly, but for a special occasion like an imperial banquet, extra care was taken. You would visit the baths in the afternoon, spending time in the various rooms, the warm room, hot room, cold plunge, to thoroughly cleanse yourself. Attendants would scrape your skin with strigils, removing oil and dirt, leaving skin clean and refreshed. After bathing, the application of perfumed oils was standard practice. Romans used scented oils extensively, and for an imperial banquet you would choose the finest fragrances available. The scent should be noticeable but not overwhelming, sophisticated but not ostentatious. Common choices included rose oil, iris oil, or oils scented with frankincense or myrrh. Hairstyling required attention. Men needed to ensure their hair was properly cut and styled in fashionable manner. During some periods this meant relatively short hair, styled with curling irons. During other periods, longer hair worn in specific styles was fashionable. Following current fashion demonstrated that you were cultured and aware of contemporary trends. Beards went in and out of fashion during the imperial period. During the late Republic and early Empire, clean-shaven faces were standard. Later, particularly after Hadrian, beards became fashionable. Ensuring your facial hair matched current imperial fashion was important. If the emperor wore a beard, you should too. If he was clean-shaven, you followed suit. For women invited to imperial banquets, hairstyling was even more elaborate. Roman women's hairstyles were extremely complex, often requiring hours of work by skilled hairdressers. The styles changed regularly, following fashions set by the empress and other prominent imperial women. Achieving the proper hairstyle required specialized servants called ornatrices, who possessed the skills to create these elaborate arrangements. The hairstyles might involve complex arrangements of curls, braids and twists, held in place with numerous pins and decorated with ribbons, jewels, or other ornaments. Some styles required false hair pieces to achieve the desired volume or length. The overall effect needed to be impressive without seeming to have required too much effort, a delicate balance. Jewellery selection required careful thought. You wanted to display wealth and status through fine jewellery, but excessive display could be seen as vulgar or as attempting to outshine the imperial family. The appropriate amount of jewellery was substantial enough to demonstrate your status, but restrained enough to show good taste. Men might wear gold rings, including the gold ring that marked equestrian status. They might wear a necklace or chain, though this was less common. The jewellery should be fine quality but not ostentatious. Women had more jewellery options: necklaces, earrings, bracelets, rings, brooches to fasten their clothing. But the same principle of impressive but not excessive applied. Clothing selection was perhaps the most important aspect of preparation. What you wore communicated multiple messages simultaneously: your wealth, your taste, your understanding of protocol, your respect for the occasion, your political position, your cultural sophistication. For men, the toga was the formal garment of Roman citizenship, and was required for formal occasions, including imperial banquets. However, the toga was notoriously difficult to wear properly. It was a large semicircular piece of wool fabric that had to be wrapped around the body in specific ways, requiring skill to achieve the proper drape and folds. The quality of the toga fabric distinguished status. Senators wore togas with a purple stripe, the toga praetexta. The whiteness of the toga mattered enormously, with frequent cleaning and bleaching required to maintain the brilliant white that Romans expected. A dingy or poorly maintained toga suggested either poverty or lack of respect for the occasion. Under the toga you would wear a tunic, typically white or off-white linen or wool. The quality of the tunic fabric and the fineness of its weaving indicated status. The tunic should be clean, well-fitted and in good repair. The length and draping of the tunic under the toga affected the overall appearance and required careful arrangement. For reclining at dinner, however, the toga was impractical. Romans understood this, and there was protocol for removing the toga after arriving at the banquet. You would wear the toga during the initial greeting and while standing, but would remove it for reclining at dinner, remaining in your tunic. Some guests wore a synthesis, a special dining garment that was acceptable for banquets. The synthesis was more comfortable for reclining than a toga, but more formal than simply wearing a tunic. It represented a middle ground that demonstrated respect for the occasion, while allowing for comfort during the long evening of reclining and eating. For women, the clothing choices were different but equally important. The stola, a long dress worn over a tunic, was the characteristic garment of respectable married women. The quality of fabric, the elaborateness of decoration, the choice of colours, all communicated status and taste. Women's garments offered more colour options than men's. While men were limited to white or off-white, with perhaps a purple stripe, women could wear various colours. However, certain colours were more prestigious than others. Purple was most exclusive and expensive. True red, obtained from expensive dyes, was also prestigious. Other colours might be acceptable, but less impressive. The palla, a large rectangular shawl or wrap, was worn over the stola in public and could be arranged in various graceful ways. The palla's fabric quality and any decoration it bore were important visual signals of wealth and status. Makeup for women was standard and expected. Roman women used various cosmetics to lighten skin, colour cheeks and lips, and enhance eyes. The application needed to be skillful. Obvious or excessive makeup was considered vulgar, but appearing without makeup at a formal occasion would suggest lack of effort or sophistication. Perfume for both men and women was essential. The choice of scent was personal, but should be sophisticated and expensive. Being able to afford the finest imported fragrances from across the empire and beyond demonstrated wealth and cosmopolitan taste. As the hour of departure approached, final checks were made. Clothing was inspected for any spots, tears, or imperfections. Hair was verified to be properly arranged. Jewellery was checked to ensure it was secure. And mentally you prepared yourself for the evening ahead, reviewing topics of conversation you had prepared, reminders of protocol you needed to follow, and goals you hoped to achieve during the banquet. The journey to the imperial palace was itself part of the experience. Most elite Romans who attended imperial banquets lived elsewhere in Rome, and needed to travel to the palace complex, typically the Palatine Hill where the imperial residences were located. You would not walk to an imperial banquet. Arriving on foot would suggest either poverty or lack of respect for the occasion. Instead, you would travel by litter, carried by enslaved men through Rome's streets. The quality of your litter and the number and appearance of your bearers communicated status. A wealthy senator might have an elaborate litter with rich curtains, carried by 8 strong, well-trained bearers dressed in matching livery. The litter might be decorated with family insignia or artistic elements that displayed taste and wealth. The bearers would be well coordinated, carrying the litter smoothly through crowded streets. The journey through Rome in the evening heading toward the Palatine provided time for final mental preparation. The sounds of the city, the jostling crowds, the smells of urban life, all gradually gave way to the more refined atmosphere near the palace. As you approached the Palatine Hill, the character of the surroundings changed. The streets became wider and cleaner. The buildings were more impressive. Other litters carrying guests to the same event appeared, creating a procession of the Empire's elite, all converging on the same destination. Guards at the base of the Palatine checked credentials, ensuring that only invited guests and authorized personnel proceeded up the hill. The invitation itself served as your pass, presented to guards who verified it before allowing your litter to continue upward. The approach to the palace itself was designed to impress. The buildings of the imperial complex were massive and magnificent, showcasing the wealth and power of the empire. The architecture was deliberately overwhelming, making every visitor feel small in comparison to the emperor's grandeur. Your litter would be carried to the designated entrance, where you would disembark. Other guests were arriving simultaneously, creating a gathering of Rome's most powerful and distinguished people. This arrival period allowed for initial greetings and social interaction before entering the palace proper. The entrance area included attendants who would take your pala or outer garments if you wore them for travel. These attendants were trained palace servants who handled the guests' belongings with appropriate care and would return them at the evening's conclusion. Initial greetings among the gathering guests were important social moments. Seeing who else had been invited provided information about the nature of the evening. A gathering that included many senators suggested political significance. One that included more cultural figures suggested an emphasis on artistic and intellectual matters. The composition of the guest list itself communicated the emperor's current priorities and interests. As guests gathered, the conversations were somewhat constrained. This wasn't the moment for extended discussions or private conversations. Brief, formal greetings were exchanged. Compliments on appearance were offered. General remarks about the pleasant weather or the honour of the invitation were acceptable. More substantive conversations would come later. The waiting period before entering the dining area varied. Sometimes guests were admitted promptly. Other times, there was a deliberate waiting period that served multiple purposes. It allowed time for all guests to arrive. It created anticipation. And it reminded everyone that they were present at the emperor's pleasure, entering when he chose to admit them. Palace officials managed the gathering guests, ensuring that appropriate social protocols were maintained. These officials were experienced in managing social hierarchies and ensuring that everyone received treatment appropriate to their rank, without creating offences or conflicts. When the moment came to enter the dining area, it was announced by palace officials. The announcement itself was ceremonial, creating a formal transition from the arrival period to the banquet proper. The wording of the announcement reinforced the emperor's generosity in hosting the event and the honour being extended to the guests. The entrance into the dining area was managed to maintain proper hierarchy. The most distinguished guests entered first, with others following in order of rank and status. The palace officials managing the entrance were skilled at maintaining this order without creating obvious awkwardness or offence. As you crossed the threshold into the dining area, the full magnificence of the setting became apparent. Everything you saw, the architecture, the decoration, the furnishings, the lighting, was designed to overwhelm and impress. The message was clear. You were in the presence of unimaginable wealth and power. The dining room, called a Triclinium, was unlike any space most guests had experienced even in their own wealthy homes. Imperial Tricliniums were vast halls capable of accommodating dozens or even hundreds of guests, decorated with a lavishness that testified to the empire's resources. The name Triclinium referred originally to the arrangement of 3 dining couches in a U-shape around a central space. While some imperial dining areas maintained this traditional arrangement for more intimate gatherings, large banquets required multiple sets of couches arranged in larger patterns throughout the space. The architecture of imperial tricliniums was monumental. High ceilings supported by marble columns created a sense of vastness. The columns themselves were often made from rare, coloured marbles imported from distant provinces: green marble from Greece, purple porphyry from Egypt, yellow marble from North Africa. The variety of marble types displayed the emperor's control over resources from across the empire. The floors were typically elaborate mosaics, intricate pictures created from thousands of tiny coloured stone tesserae. The images might depict mythological scenes, geometric patterns, or representations of nature. Some dining rooms featured mosaics showing food items or dining scenes, creating artistic reflections of the activities that would occur in the space. The walls were decorated with frescoes, paintings applied directly to wet plaster that became permanent parts of the walls as they dried. These frescoes might show landscapes, architectural illusions that made walls seem to open onto gardens or colonnades, mythological scenes, or portraits. The quality of these paintings was extraordinary, created by skilled artists employed by the imperial household. The ceiling was equally impressive. Some tricliniums featured elaborately coffered ceilings, with each recess decorated with painted or gilded details. Others had vaulted ceilings painted to resemble the sky, complete with stars or clouds. Some especially elaborate dining rooms featured mechanical ceilings that could open to reveal the actual sky or close to protect against weather. The lighting transformed the space into something magical. During daylight banquets, large windows allowed natural light to flood the room. For evening events, countless oil lamps and candles created a warm, flickering illumination that made the gilded and painted surfaces glow. The lamps themselves were often artistic objects, bronze pieces shaped as animals, mythological figures, or decorative forms. The smell of the space was pleasant and deliberately created. Incense burned in various parts of the room, creating fragrant smoke that perfumed the air. The specific incenses, frankincense from Arabia, various resins from Africa, perfumed woods, were expensive substances that displayed wealth, while creating an atmosphere different from ordinary spaces. The temperature was managed carefully. In summer, the room might be cooled by servants using large fans, or by water features like fountains that cooled the air through evaporation. In winter, Hippocaust heating or braziers kept the space comfortable. The emperor's comfort and that of his guests was maintained through careful attention. The furniture in the Triclinium consisted primarily of the dining couches and small tables. The couches were substantial pieces, wooden frames with webbing or leather straps supporting thick mattresses and cushions. The frames might be decorated with inlay, carving, or precious metal attachments. Each dining couch accommodated 3 people, who reclined on their left sides, propped on their left elbows, with their right hands free for eating. This reclining position, which might seem awkward to modern people, was standard Roman practice for formal dining. It was considered civilized and proper, distinguishing Romans from less sophisticated peoples who sat to eat. The cushions and coverlets on the couches were luxurious textiles. The fabrics might be fine wool, linen, or even silk. The colours were often vibrant, using expensive dyes. Some coverlets featured embroidery or woven patterns. Everything was regularly cleaned and maintained to present perfect appearance. The small tables placed before each couch held the dishes of food and cups of wine. These tables were low enough to be reached easily by the reclining diners, but substantial enough to hold the numerous dishes that would be served throughout the evening. The tables themselves might be fine wood, sometimes with elaborate inlay or carving. The space included other furniture as well. Side tables held supplies of dishes, cups, and serving implements. Stands held lamps or decorative objects. Some tricliniums included fountains or water features that provided pleasant sounds and helped cool the air. The servants who would serve the meal were present but unobtrusive, positioned to respond quickly to any need but not intruding on the social space of the guests. These servants were trained in proper protocol, understanding their roles in the elaborate social theatre of the imperial banquet. The overall effect of the Triclinium was deliberately overwhelming. Every element, the architecture, the decoration, the furnishings, the lighting, the scent, combined to create an environment that demonstrated imperial power and wealth. Guests were meant to be impressed, to understand viscerally the gulf between even wealthy private citizens and the emperor. Yet the space was also designed for comfort and pleasure. Despite its grandeur, the Triclinium was a functional dining space, where people would spend hours in reasonable comfort. The balance between impressive display and practical functionality was carefully maintained. As guests entered the Triclinium, they didn't simply choose where to recline. Seating arrangements at imperial banquets were carefully planned, reflecting social hierarchies and the emperor's current favour toward different individuals. Understanding where you were placed and what it meant was crucial to navigating the social dynamics of the evening. Palace officials directed guests to their assigned places. These officials had lists showing the seating plan and were responsible for ensuring everyone found their proper position. The process of getting everyone properly placed took time, and during this period guests had opportunities to see who was positioned near them and what this might signify. The most honoured positions were closest to the emperor. The exact arrangement varied, but typically the couch immediately to the emperor's right, from his perspective, held the most distinguished guests. Secondary honoured positions were to the emperor's left and on other couches near him. Distance from the emperor correlated directly with status and favour. Guests positioned far from the imperial presence understood that, while they were honoured to be invited at all, they were less important in the emperor's current estimation than those positioned nearby. This could be due to lower social rank, recent actions that displeased the emperor, or simply that they were new to imperial society. Each dining couch accommodated 3 people in specific positions. The position at the bottom of the couch, closest to the table, was most honoured. The middle position was secondary. The top position, farthest from the table, was least honoured. These distinctions mattered, particularly when couches held guests of varying status. A senator might find himself positioned on the bottom of a couch, the honoured position, with 2 lesser guests in middle and top positions. Alternatively, if the entire couch held people of similar rank, the positioning might reflect subtle distinctions in current favour or seniority. Women and men might be seated separately or mixed, depending on the emperor's preference and the nature of the occasion. Some emperors preferred separate dining areas for women, while others included women among the mixed company. When mixed seating occurred, additional protocol governed how men and women interacted. Married couples might be placed on the same couch or separated depending on social considerations. Placing a husband and wife together honoured their partnership. Separating them allowed each to engage in conversations with different people, potentially serving political or social purposes. The empress, when she attended, occupied a position of honour similar to the emperor's. She might recline on a separate but equal couch, or she might share the emperor's couch. Depending on the arrangement and the imperial couple's preferences, the positioning of the empress influenced the positions of other women present. Once positioned on your assigned couch, you would arrange yourself in the proper reclining position. This took some practice, as maintaining the position for hours while eating, drinking, and conversing required getting comfortable while still maintaining proper form and dignity. The left arm bore your weight, typically propped on a cushion that raised you enough to reach food easily. Your legs extended back along the couch, often with cushions supporting them. Your right hand was free for eating, drinking, and gesturing during conversation. The position, while perhaps strange to those unfamiliar with it, became comfortable with practice. Your couch companions mattered enormously. The people you were positioned with would be your primary conversation partners throughout the evening. If positioned next to distinguished or interesting people, the evening would be pleasant and potentially productive. If positioned next to bores or people you found disagreeable, the hours ahead would be more challenging. Initial greetings with your couch companions established the social dynamic for the evening. Brief introductions, compliments, and neutral pleasantries set a friendly tone. The conversations would deepen as the evening progressed, but these initial moments established rapport. The guest positioned on the bottom of the couch, the honoured position, typically initiated conversations and set the tone for the couch's social dynamic. The others responded to his lead, though as the evening progressed and wine flowed, the interactions might become less formal. Observing the full seating arrangement provided information about the political and social landscape. Seeing which senators were positioned near the emperor revealed who currently held favour. Noticing which military commanders or foreign dignitaries received honoured positions indicated current policy priorities. The seating plan was a map of power relationships, readable to those who understood the code. Some guests found themselves positioned near rivals or political opponents. This might be deliberate on the emperor's part, either to encourage reconciliation or to observe how they interacted. Managing these situations required tact and composure, as any conflict or rudeness would be observed and noted. The seating arrangement also determined what parts of the evening's entertainment you could see clearly. Guests positioned to have the best views of performances were subtly favoured. Those positioned where views were obstructed received a less favourable experience, though complaining would be inappropriate. Once everyone was positioned and comfortable, There was a brief moment of settling before the evening's formalities began. This moment allowed final adjustments to cushions, arrangement of clothing, and mental preparation for the hours ahead. The moment of the Emperor's entrance was the ceremonial high point that officially began the banquet. Even though guests were already reclining and positioned, the event didn't truly begin until the Emperor himself appeared. His entrance was carefully staged to reinforce his special status and the extraordinary nature of the occasion. The announcement of the Emperor's approach came from palace officials. The announcement itself varied by Emperor. Some preferred simple statements, others elaborate formal declarations, but all served to alert guests to compose themselves and prepare for the imperial presence. As the Emperor entered, all guests who were physically able would rise from their reclining positions briefly in a gesture of respect. This was protocol, expected and practiced. The Emperor would acknowledge this respect with a gesture indicating that guests should return to their positions. The Emperor's appearance was itself impressive. He wore the finest clothing, jewellery that emphasised his status, and carried himself with the dignity expected of the world's most powerful individual. His clothing might be purple, the imperial colour, or white with purple trim. The quality of the fabric was the absolute finest available. The Emperor was typically accompanied by close advisors or family members who would dine near him. These companions shared in the reflected glory of proximity to power, while also serving practical purposes. They could help manage social dynamics, provide conversation if the Emperor desired it, or handle any issues that arose. The Emperor's progress to his position allowed guests to observe him, and for him to observe them. Eye contact during this moment was significant. A guest who caught the Emperor's eye and received a nod or smile had been acknowledged and favoured. A guest who was pointedly ignored understood they had displeased the Emperor somehow. Once the Emperor was positioned on his couch, he would typically make a brief speech welcoming guests and officially opening the banquet. These speeches varied by Emperor and occasion. Some were brief and formal, others were more personal, perhaps mentioning specific guests or the reason for the gathering. The Emperor's speaking style revealed much about his personality and preferences. An emperor who spoke eloquently and at length valued rhetoric and cultural refinement. One who spoke briefly and simply might prefer more direct military-style communication. Guests listened carefully both for the content and for what the style revealed about how to interact with the Emperor during the evening. After the Emperor's opening remarks, a formal toast would typically occur. The Emperor would be served wine first, would raise his cup, and would propose a toast, perhaps to Rome's glory, to military victories, to the prosperity of the empire, or to the guests' health and happiness. Guests would respond by raising their own cups and echoing the sentiment. This opening toast was ceremonial and relatively formal. Later toasts throughout the evening would be more relaxed, but this initial toast set proper tone and reinforced appropriate hierarchy. The Emperor drank first, then guests drank, maintaining the protocol that the Emperor initiated all significant actions. Some emperors preferred more elaborate opening ceremonies. They might have poets recite verses in honour of the occasion. They might have priests perform brief religious rites to bless the gathering. They might have musicians play particular pieces that held significance. These variations reflected each emperor's personal preferences and priorities. Once the opening ceremonies concluded, the Emperor would signal for the meal to begin. This signal, perhaps a gesture to servants, a nod to officials, or simply beginning to eat himself, communicated that the formal portion was complete and the actual dining and socialising could commence. The transition from ceremonial opening to actual banquet was marked by a slight relaxation in atmosphere. While protocol remained important throughout the evening, the most rigid formality of the opening moments gave way to something slightly more comfortable and social. The Emperor's role throughout the evening was complex. He was host, entertaining guests and ensuring they enjoyed themselves. He was also Emperor, maintaining his dignity and authority. He was performer, creating the social atmosphere and managing the dynamics of the gathering. And he was observer, watching guests and learning about them through their behaviour. Different emperors managed this complex role differently. Augustus was known for relatively modest, cultured gatherings where literature and intelligent conversation were emphasised. Nero preferred elaborate entertainments and theatrical displays. Trajan focused on military matters and included many soldiers among his guests. Each emperor's personality shaped the character of their banquets. Guests needed to read the emperor's mood and preferences throughout the evening, adjusting their behaviour accordingly. An emperor who seemed interested in serious political discussion called for different responses than one who preferred lighter entertainment and jokes. Successfully navigating this required social intelligence and careful observation. The emperor's attention was the most valuable commodity at the banquet. Everyone present hoped for some personal interaction with the emperor, a brief conversation, a shared joke, a nod of approval. These moments of imperial attention could advance careers, cement alliances, or simply provide satisfying validation of one's importance. But demanding or obviously seeking the emperor's attention was inappropriate and counterproductive. The proper approach was to be interesting and valuable enough that the emperor chose to interact with you rather than obviously pursuing his notice. This delicate balance required confidence without arrogance, presence without pushiness. The meal itself at an imperial banquet was an extraordinary display of culinary sophistication, featuring foods from across the empire and beyond. Roman haute cuisine had developed into a complex art form, and imperial banquets showcased the pinnacle of this culinary tradition. The structure of a Roman formal dinner followed a standard pattern adapted and elaborated for imperial occasions. The meal consisted of three main parts: the gustatio or appetizers, the prima mensa or main courses, and the secunda mensa or desserts and sweets. Each part included multiple dishes served in succession. The gustatio began with lighter dishes designed to stimulate appetite and welcome guests to the meal. These weren't simple dishes, but rather carefully prepared delicacies that immediately demonstrated the quality and sophistication of what was to come. Eggs prepared in various ways were traditional in Roman gustatio. These might be boiled eggs served with special sauces, eggs cooked in pastry, or eggs prepared with expensive ingredients like peacock or exotic birds. The eggs symbolized new beginnings and were considered proper for starting meals. Shellfish and seafood were prominent in appetizer courses. Oysters, especially prized by Romans, appeared frequently. The oysters might come from Britannian coasts, transported live in seawater to Roman markets, and served fresh. Other shellfish, clams, mussels, sea urchins, provided variety. Small fish, particularly expensive species like mullet, might be served whole or in prepared dishes. Larger fish might appear as portions. The fish were prepared with complex sauces, featuring Roman favourites like garum, the fermented fish sauce that was ubiquitous in Roman cooking and came in various qualities and flavours. Vegetables prepared in elaborate ways appeared in appetizer courses. Asparagus, artichokes, mushrooms, particularly expensive varieties like truffles, all might feature. The vegetables were typically cooked and served with sauces rather than raw, as Romans generally preferred cooked vegetables. Salads composed of various greens and herbs were common. Roman salads differed from modern ones, often featuring cooked, as well as raw components and complex dressings. The dressing might include vinegar, oil, garum, honey, herbs and spices, creating complex flavour profiles. Meat appeared even in appetizer courses, though typically in smaller portions or simpler preparations than would come later. Small birds, thrushes, warblers, fig peckers were considered delicacies. These might be roasted, grilled or prepared in sauces. Some were served whole, presenting visual as well as gustatory interest. Sausages and cured meats provided variety. Romans produced various types of sausages, often highly seasoned with herbs and spices. Cured pork products, including items similar to modern ham or bacon, appeared in appetizer courses. The presentation of each dish was important. Foods were arranged artistically on serving platters made of silver, sometimes gilded, or even gold for the most extravagant displays. The visual impact of the food mattered as much as the taste, with colours, shapes, and arrangements all considered. Some dishes featured trompe-l'oeil effects, foods made to look like other things. A dish might appear to be one food, but reveal itself to be something else when cut or tasted. These culinary tricks amused guests, and demonstrated the sophistication of the imperial kitchens. Sauces were fundamental to Roman cooking, and appetizer dishes showcased the sauce-making skills of imperial cooks. The sauces might be sweet, sour, spicy, or complex combinations of flavours: honey, vinegar, wine, herbs, spices, garum, all combined in various ways to create the characteristic flavours of Roman haute cuisine. Herbs and spices featured prominently. Romans used local Mediterranean herbs: parsley, cilantro, mint, oregano, thyme, alongside imported spices from Asia and Africa. Pepper, cinnamon, ginger, saffron, and various other spices demonstrated the reach of Roman trade and the wealth available to the imperial household. The quantities of food served in even the appetizer course were substantial. Multiple dishes appeared simultaneously or in quick succession, offering far more food than anyone would eat completely. The abundance itself was part of the display, showing that the emperor's resources were so vast that he could offer more than anyone could consume. Servants brought each dish on elaborate serving platters, moving efficiently through the Triclinium to ensure all guests were served. The choreography of service was carefully planned, with servants trained to serve smoothly without disrupting conversations or the social atmosphere. Each guest helped themselves from the serving platters, taking portions of whichever dishes appealed to them. There was no requirement to take some of everything, though sampling widely demonstrated appreciation for the host's generosity. Taking too much of any single dish or eating greedily was considered poor form. The food was eaten with the right hand, as the left hand supported your reclining position. Romans didn't use forks. These wouldn't be common in Europe for many more centuries. Instead, food was eaten with fingers, supplemented by spoons for liquids or soft foods. Knives were available for cutting meat, but weren't necessary for most dishes as food came in manageable pieces. Napkins were provided for wiping hands and mouth. These might be cloth napkins provided by the host, or napkins that guests brought with them. Using napkins properly and frequently demonstrated good manners and refinement. Some guests brought their own napkins specifically to take home leftovers. This was acceptable practice and even expected at elaborate banquets. The appetizer course lasted for a substantial period, perhaps an hour or more. This wasn't rushed eating, but rather leisurely sampling of various dishes, while conversing with couch companions and observing the social dynamics of the gathering. The pacing allowed for digestion, and for the social aspects of the event to develop. Between dishes, there were brief pauses when servants cleared away used serving platters and prepared to bring new ones. These transitions were managed smoothly to maintain the flow of the meal without awkward gaps that might disrupt conversation. Wine accompanied the food from the beginning. However, during the appetizer course, the wine was typically mixed with water and consumed in moderation. The serious drinking came later. During the earlier courses, wine was treated more as a beverage accompanying food, rather than as a focus of attention itself. The conversations during the appetizer course tended toward lighter topics. Guests were still somewhat formal with each other, relationships were being established, and the evening was just beginning. Compliments on the food, discussion of its origins or preparation, comments on the excellence of the emperor's hospitality, these were safe and appropriate topics. As the appetizer course concluded, guests had begun to relax somewhat into the evening's rhythm. The initial nervousness of arrival had faded, replaced by growing comfort with the situation. The social dynamics of each couch were establishing themselves, and the prospect of the main courses ahead created anticipation. The prima mensa, or main courses, represented the heart of the imperial banquet. This was when the true extravagance and culinary sophistication of the imperial kitchens became fully apparent, with elaborate meat dishes, complex preparations, and increasingly theatrical presentations. The transition from appetizers to main courses was marked by a brief pause, allowing guests to settle and prepare for the substantial dishes to come. Servants cleared away the dishes and debris from the appetizer course, refreshed wine cups, and prepared the space for the next phase of the meal. Pork was central to Roman cuisine, and featured prominently in main courses. The Romans considered pork the finest meat, and imperial banquets showcased the most elaborate pork preparations. Whole roasted pigs might appear, elaborately presented and carved by skilled servants at the banquet. The whole roasted pig might be presented with ceremony, carried through the Triclinium by multiple servants so all guests could admire it before carving. Some presentations included theatrical elements. The pig might be stuffed with smaller birds or sausages that spilled out dramatically when it was cut open. Various pork products appeared throughout main courses. Roasted pork cuts, grilled pork, pork in complex sauces, pork prepared with sweet or sour flavour profiles, all demonstrated the versatility of this favoured meat. The quality of the pork, raised on specific diets, sourced from famous farms, was discussed and appreciated. Boar meat, considered more flavourful and challenging to obtain than domestic pork, was especially prestigious. Hunting boar was a sport of the wealthy, and serving boar meat demonstrated connection to this aristocratic activity. The boar might be roasted whole, and presented with elaborate garnishing that emphasised its wild origin. Poultry of various kinds appeared in main courses. Chickens and geese were common, but imperial banquets featured more exotic birds. Peacock was particularly associated with luxury and ostentation. The peacock might be roasted and then reassembled with its brilliant feathers, creating a spectacular visual presentation. Pheasants, guinea fowl and other game birds provided variety. Flamingo tongues, considered a particular delicacy despite the modern difficulty in understanding their appeal, sometimes appeared as an extreme luxury item. The inclusion of such expensive rarities demonstrated imperial wealth. Beef appeared less frequently than pork, but still featured in main courses, particularly preparations highlighting expensive cuts. Romans generally ate less beef than pork, as cattle were valuable working animals, but wealthy Romans and certainly the imperial household could afford to serve beef at banquets. Lamb and mutton appeared in various preparations. These might be roasted, grilled, or prepared in stews and complex sauces. The meats were typically well seasoned with herbs and spices, following Roman preferences for bold, complex flavours. Game meats showcased hunting prowess and access to wild animals. Venison from deer or other game animals appeared in various forms. Hare was considered a delicacy. These wild meats carried associations with countryside estates and aristocratic hunting, adding social meaning to their culinary appeal. The sauces accompanying main course meats were elaborate and flavourful. Roman cuisine emphasised sauces more than modern Western cooking does, with the sauce often being as important as the meat itself. Sweet and sour combinations were common, mixing honey or fruit with vinegar. Spice-heavy sauces demonstrated access to expensive imported spices. Garum, the fermented fish sauce fundamental to Roman cooking, appeared in various qualities and flavours. The finest garum was extremely expensive, made from specific fish and aged carefully. Using the best garum in sauces was a mark of quality and expense that knowledgeable guests would recognise and appreciate. Fish and seafood continued to appear even in main courses, though they had featured prominently in appetizers. Larger fish, prepared whole or in substantial portions, might be served with elaborate sauces. Certain fish, like mullet, were especially prized and expensive. Vegetables accompanied the meat dishes, but were generally sporting players rather than stars in Roman haute cuisine. However, expensive or rare vegetables received attention. Artichokes, asparagus, mushrooms, particularly prized varieties like truffles, all appeared in main courses. Some vegetable dishes were elaborate preparations cooked with multiple ingredients and complex seasonings. Vegetable-based side dishes might be as carefully prepared as meat dishes, demonstrating culinary skill and sophisticated palates that appreciated vegetables beyond simple boiling. The quantity of dishes in the main courses was overwhelming. Multiple meat dishes appeared, along with fish, vegetables, and accompaniments. The servants moved constantly, bringing new dishes, clearing away finished ones, managing the flow of food to ensure all guests had access to variety. The theatrical elements of presentation increased during main courses. Some dishes were brought in under covered serving domes that were removed with flourishes to reveal the food. Others were presented with explanations of their ingredients or preparation methods, delivered by servants trained to discuss the food knowledgeably. Some emperors encouraged or organised surprises during main courses. A seemingly ordinary dish might turn out to contain unexpected elements. A pie might be cut open to release live birds. These surprises amused guests and became stories that spread beyond the banquet, enhancing the emperor's reputation for spectacular entertaining. The cooking methods varied. Roasting on spits over open fires created one set of flavours and textures. Grilling over charcoal created others. Baking in ovens, stewing in pots, all produced different results. The imperial kitchens employed all these methods, staffed by skilled cooks who specialised in different techniques. The ingredients represented the breadth of the empire. Meats might come from estates in various provinces. Fish came from different seas. Spices arrived from Asia and Africa through Rome's extensive trade networks. The meal was an edible map of Roman power and commerce. The seasonings reflected sophisticated palates. Roman haute cuisine favoured complex flavours over simple ones. Sweet, sour, salty, bitter, and umami all appeared. Often in the same dish, modern palates might find some Roman flavour combinations strange. but within Roman cultural context, they represented refinement and sophistication. As the main courses continued, the pace remained leisurely. There was no rush to move through dishes. Guests ate at their own pace, sampling what interested them, leaving what didn't. The abundance meant that no one needed to eat everything or even try everything, though sampling widely demonstrated appropriate appreciation. The conversations during main courses often became more animated as wine consumption increased and guests grew more comfortable with each other. The topics ranged widely: politics, military matters, literature, philosophy, gossip about mutual acquaintances, humorous anecdotes. The specific topics varied by the interests of the couch companions. Servants continued to circulate, not just bringing food, but also removing debris, refilling wine cups, offering water for washing hands, generally maintaining cleanliness and comfort. The service was attentive without being intrusive, the servants trained to anticipate needs without constantly interrupting. The duration of the main courses was substantial, perhaps 2 hours or more. This extended period allowed full appreciation of the variety of dishes, time for digestion, and ample opportunity for social interaction. That was as much the point of the evening as the food itself. As the main courses gradually concluded, with the stream of meat and fish dishes finally slowing, there would be a transition period. Servants cleared away the substantial debris from the main courses, refreshed the space, and prepared for the final phase of the meal, the desserts and sweet dishes. The secunda mensa, or second table, marked the final phase of the meal proper. This course featured sweets, fruits, nuts, and various delicacies that provided a lighter end to the substantial feast that had preceded, though lighter in character. The second mesa still demonstrated luxury and sophistication. Fresh fruits were the centerpiece of Roman dessert courses. The variety and quality of fruits demonstrated the reach of Roman agriculture and trade. Apples, pears, figs, dates, grapes, pomegranates, melons, cherries, plums, peaches, apricots. The selection varied by season but was always extensive and of the finest quality. Some fruits were particular luxuries. Dates from North Africa or the Near East were expensive imports. Citrus fruits, though less common in the Roman period than they would become later, appeared when available. The best fruits from the emperor's own estates or from famous fruit-producing regions were selected for imperial banquets. The presentation of fruit was artistic. Fruits might be arranged in elaborate displays, creating beautiful visual effects with different colours and shapes. Some fruits were served whole, others cut or prepared in various ways. The artistry demonstrated that even simple fruit deserved refined presentation. Nuts accompanied fruits in dessert courses. Almonds, walnuts, hazelnuts, and pine nuts appeared in various forms. Some were served plain, roasted, or seasoned. Others appeared in prepared dishes, incorporated into sweet compositions or coatings. Honey-based sweets were important in Roman desserts, as refined sugar was unknown. Honey provided the primary sweetener for Roman cooking, and skilled cooks created various sweets using honey as the foundation. These might be simple honey-drizzled fruits or elaborate preparations combining honey with nuts, fruits, and other ingredients. Pastries and baked sweets appeared in various forms. Roman bakers produced items that might seem familiar: honey cakes, nut pastries, fruit-filled pastries. Others were distinctively Roman preparations that don't have direct modern equivalents. The pastries were often fried rather than baked, creating crispy textures. Cheese appeared in dessert courses, though it might also have appeared earlier in the meal. Romans produced various cheeses, and the finest varieties were served at imperial banquets. The cheese might be served plain with honey, or incorporated into sweet dishes. Some sweet preparations were elaborate and theatrical. A dessert might be constructed to look like something else. A fruit that was actually sweet cheese. A cake shaped like a meat dish. Various trompe-l'oeil creations that amused guests while showcasing culinary skill. The quantities remained abundant even in dessert courses, with more varieties of sweets, fruits, and delicacies than anyone could consume. The continued abundance through to the meal's end reinforced the message of imperial wealth and generosity. Wine continued to flow during dessert courses, though some guests might switch to sweeter wines that complemented the desserts better. The Romans produced various wine styles, including sweet wines from dried grapes that paired well with sweet foods. The dessert course was somewhat briefer than the previous courses, perhaps lasting an hour rather than longer. The meal had by this point extended for several hours, and while the secunda mensa was important, it didn't have quite the same elaborate structure as earlier courses. As dessert concluded, the formal meal was complete. However, the evening was far from over. The conclusion of eating marked a transition to the next phase of the banquet, the commissatio or drinking party, which had its own protocols and character. Before transitioning to the drinking party, there was typically a pause. Servants cleared away the dishes and debris from the meal, swept the floors if necessary, brought fresh napkins and basins of water for guests to wash hands and faces, generally refreshed the space for the next phase of the evening. Some guests might take this transitional moment to step outside briefly, to relieve themselves, get fresh air, or simply move after hours of reclining. The palace facilities were available, and servants could direct guests as needed. This brief recess helped prepare everyone for the hours still ahead. The mood at this transition point was typically relaxed and convivial. The formal structure of the meal had concluded. The serious consumption of food was done. What remained was drinking, entertainment, and socialising in an atmosphere that would become progressively less formal as the evening advanced and wine consumption increased. The commissatio, or symposium as the Greeks called it, was the drinking party that followed the meal. This phase of the evening had different character from the meal itself. Less formal, more social, focused on wine consumption, conversation and entertainment rather than food. The transition to commissatio was often marked by choosing a magister bibendi, or master of drinking. This person, typically chosen by lot or game, had authority to determine how the wine would be mixed and consumed during the drinking party. The position was somewhat ceremonial but also practical, creating structure for the drinking that would follow. The master of drinking decided the ratio of water to wine. Romans almost always diluted wine with water, considering drinking undiluted wine barbaric and dangerous. The ratio varied based on occasion and preference. Stronger mixtures with less water were appropriate for symposia where serious drinking was intended. Weaker mixtures, with more water, suited more moderate occasions. The proportion of water to wine communicated intentions for the evening. A ratio of 1 part wine to 2 or 3 parts water suggested moderate civilized drinking. Equal parts wine and water indicated a more spirited evening. Less water than wine suggested a night of serious drinking where getting drunk was acceptable or even expected. The emperor might choose to serve as magister bibendi himself, or he might delegate the role to an honoured guest. Either choice carried meaning. The emperor directing the drinking personally showed his engagement with the gathering, while delegating it honoured the chosen guest. The wines served at imperial banquets represented the finest available. Romans produced wine throughout Italy and many provinces. The most prestigious wines came from famous regions like Falernian, Caecuban, or Satine. These wines were aged, sometimes for decades, and were extremely expensive. The quality of wine was a serious matter for Romans. They could discourse knowledgeably about different wine regions, vintages, aging processes, and the characteristics that made wines superior or inferior. Serving the finest wines demonstrated the emperor's taste and resources. The wine was served from large mixing vessels called craters, where wine and water were combined according to the magister bibendi's specifications. From the craters, servants poured wine into guests' cups, moving constantly throughout the evening to ensure no cup remained empty long. The drinking cups themselves were often beautiful objects. Silver cups were common for wealthy Romans, but imperial banquets might feature cups made of gold, decorated with jewels, or made from precious materials like carved crystal or carved gemstones. Some emperors owned drinking vessels worth fortunes. The cups might be artistic masterpieces, decorated with mythological scenes, embossed patterns or figural decorations. Some featured technical sophistication like double walls or cooling chambers. Using such valuable vessels emphasised the extraordinary wealth being displayed. Toasts punctuated the drinking party. A guest might propose a toast to the emperor, to Rome's military victories, to particular individuals present, to absent friends, to various gods, or to abstract concepts like peace or prosperity. Others would respond by drinking. These toasts created structure and social bonding. Some toasts were ceremonial and relatively formal. Others became playful, especially as the evening progressed and wine took effect. Toasts might include jokes, wordplay, or witty observations. Responding cleverly to toasts demonstrated the quick thinking and verbal facility that Romans valued. Games sometimes accompanied drinking. Romans enjoyed various party games, some involving skill, some chance, some verbal cleverness. These games might determine who drank next, how much, or similar stakes. The games added entertainment and structure to the drinking. Dice games were popular despite periodic attempts to ban gambling. At imperial banquets, the stakes would be nominal, drinking penalties rather than serious money. But the games themselves entertained participants and spectators, and winning demonstrated luck that Romans considered significant. Verbal games tested wit and education. Games might involve completing poetic verses, responding to questions about mythology or literature, constructing wordplay or puns. Success in these games demonstrated the cultural refinement that elite Romans valued and worked to display. The emperor's participation in games and drinking varied by individual preference and occasion. Some emperors joined enthusiastically, demonstrating common touch and accessibility. Others maintained more distance, participating ceremonially, but avoiding the complete informality that wine and games could create. As wine consumption increased, the atmosphere became progressively less formal. Conversations grew louder and more animated. Laughter increased. The rigid social hierarchies of earlier in the evening relaxed somewhat, though they never disappeared entirely. Even drunk guests remained aware of their relationship to the emperor and to each other. The servants managing the drinking party worked constantly, refilling cups, bringing fresh wine, managing the mixing vessels, cleaning up spills and breakage. The service remained efficient despite the increasing informality of the gathering. Some guests became quite drunk as the commissatio progressed. This was accepted within limits. Getting pleasantly drunk was expected at drinking parties. Getting so drunk as to be ill, violent, or seriously inappropriate remained unacceptable and would damage one's reputation. The conversations during the drinking party became more personal and wide-ranging. Early evening formality gave way to franker discussions. Political opinions might be expressed more openly. Personal stories and anecdotes were shared. Confidences were exchanged between people who had bonded over hours of shared experience. These drinking party conversations were often memorable and significant. Friendships were formed or strengthened. Political alliances took shape. Information was exchanged. The combination of wine, prolonged social interaction, and the special context of the imperial banquet created conditions where important social bonds developed. The emperor's interactions with guests during the commissatio were particularly significant. Wine lowered inhibitions, making the emperor somewhat more accessible. A personal conversation with the emperor during the drinking party, when he was relaxed and informal, could create a bond that affected future interactions. However, the informality had limits. The emperor remained emperor. Presuming too much on the relaxed atmosphere could be disastrous. Guests needed to calibrate their behaviour carefully, being friendly and engaging without crossing lines that would cause offence or seem to lack proper respect. The duration of the commissatio varied but typically lasted several hours. The drinking party might continue into the early morning hours, particularly if the emperor was enjoying himself, and showed no signs of ending the gathering. Guests couldn't leave before the emperor indicated the evening was over. Throughout the banquet, but particularly during the commissatio, entertainment provided diversions and enhanced the festive atmosphere. Imperial banquets featured performances by the finest entertainers available, showcasing arts that range from refined to spectacular. Musical performances were integral to banquets. Romans appreciated music, and wealthy hosts employed skilled musicians. Imperial banquets featured the best musicians in Rome, playing various instruments and performing in different styles. The instruments included string instruments like lyres and kitharas, which produced melodious sounds suitable for accompanying poetry or creating pleasant background music. Wind instruments included various types of flutes and pipes. Percussion instruments provided rhythm. The music varied in character and purpose. Some music was quiet background accompaniment that didn't interfere with conversation. Other performances were intended as focal entertainment, with guests expected to listen attentively and appreciate the skill involved. Vocal performances showcased singers performing various types of pieces. Some singers performed traditional Roman songs, others performed Greek songs. As Greek culture was highly respected in Rome, the lyrics might be serious, mythological themes, historical events, or light entertainment. Dancers performed during many imperial banquets. Roman dance traditions included various styles, from stately, formal dances to more energetic performances. Some dancers specialised in theatrical dance that told stories through movement. Female dancers, including those from regions like Spain or Syria famous for distinctive dance styles, performed at banquets. These performances were appreciated as artistic displays. The dancers wore costumes appropriate to their styles, and their movements were choreographed and rehearsed. Acrobats and physical performers demonstrated impressive feats. Juggling, tumbling, contortions, balancing acts all entertained guests who appreciated the skill and training such performances required. Some physical performances were quite elaborate, featuring multiple performers working in coordination. Actors might perform scenes from plays or present comic sketches. Roman theatre was popular, and bringing theatrical performance to the banquet hall was a form of luxury entertainment. The performances might be excerpts from famous works or original pieces created specifically for the occasion. Some performances were more participatory, involving guests. A singer might invite audience response or participation. Performers might interact with guests, creating engagement rather than simply being observed. This participatory element made entertainment more engaging. Literary entertainment was important at some imperial banquets, particularly those hosted by emperors who valued cultural refinement. Poets might recite original verses, perhaps composed specifically about the banquet or honouring the emperor. Scholars might engage in learned discussions or debates about literary or philosophical topics. Dramatic recitations of famous literary works entertained educated guests who appreciated hearing skilled performers bring text to life. An actor reciting passages from Homer, Virgil, or other great authors demonstrated cultural sophistication while entertaining guests. Some emperors encouraged or participated in performances themselves. Nero famously fancied himself a performer, and sometimes sang or recited at his own banquets. Other emperors might recite poetry, or deliver speeches as part of the evening's entertainment. The emperor's artistic participation was always received enthusiastically by guests, regardless of actual skill level. Criticising the emperor's performance would be unthinkable. Instead, guests applauded vigorously and offered compliments, demonstrating loyalty and appropriate appreciation. Animal performances sometimes appeared at banquets, particularly those emphasising spectacle. Trained animals might perform tricks. Exotic animals might be displayed, demonstrating the reach of Roman power into distant lands and the emperor's resources to obtain rarities. Some entertainment was more elaborate and theatrical. Mechanical devices created special effects, moving scenery, opening ceilings to reveal the sky, water effects. These theatrical elements created spectacular presentations that guests would remember and discuss. The sequencing of entertainment throughout the evening was carefully planned. Quieter, more refined entertainment might accompany the meal, allowing conversation to continue. More spectacular or attention-demanding entertainment came during the commissatio when the meal was complete, and full attention could be given to performances. The quality of entertainment reflected on the emperor's taste and resources. Employing the finest performers, presenting sophisticated and varied entertainment, creating memorable spectacles, all demonstrated imperial magnificence and proper hospitality. Guests were expected to show appropriate appreciation for entertainment, applause, exclamations of approval, compliments to performers, all were expected. Responses, seeming bored or unimpressed by the emperor's entertainment, would be insulting and noted. The entertainment also served social functions. It provided topics for conversation among guests. It created shared experiences that bonded those who witnessed them. It gave guests stories to share when describing the banquet to others later. Some entertainment was deliberately surprising or shocking, creating dramatic moments that became the evening's highlights. A performance might build to an unexpected climax. An exotic animal might suddenly appear. A mechanical effect might create a spectacular visual moment. The overall effect of well-managed entertainment was to create an evening that engaged multiple senses and provided various types of pleasure. The combination of excellent food, fine wine, beautiful surroundings, good company, and sophisticated entertainment created experiences that justified the enormous expense and effort imperial banquets required. Beyond the food, wine, and entertainment, imperial banquets were venues for important social and political activities. The gatherings brought together powerful people in relatively informal settings, creating opportunities for interactions that could significantly impact careers and policies. The conversations among guests served multiple purposes beyond simple socializing. Information was exchanged about current events, political developments, military situations, or personal circumstances. In an age before mass media, such direct sharing of news and perspectives was valuable. Political alliances were formed or strengthened through banquet interactions. Two senators who bonded over conversation at an imperial banquet might become political collaborators. A military commander and a wealthy merchant might establish a relationship that benefited both. The social bonds created at banquets translated into political and economic partnerships. The emperor's presence made political dynamics particularly significant. Everyone was aware that their interactions were potentially observable by the emperor or by others who might report to him. This created careful behaviour where everything said might have political implications. Some conversations at banquets were deliberately political. Discussions of policy matters, military strategies, administrative challenges all occurred among guests who held positions of power and responsibility. These weren't necessarily formal consultations, but rather the informal discussions through which policy sometimes developed. The emperor himself might participate in these political conversations, seeking input from experienced advisors or simply engaging with the issues of governance. The banquet setting, more relaxed than formal meetings, sometimes facilitated franker exchanges than would occur in official contexts. Favour-seeking was a constant undercurrent at imperial banquets. Guests hoped to advance their interest through interaction with the emperor or with other powerful individuals present. This favour-seeking needed to be subtle and socially acceptable rather than obvious and grasping. A guest might arrange to mention a matter of personal interest in conversation, hoping it would come to the emperor's attention in a favourable light. Another might position themselves near someone whose support they sought, using the evening to build rapport. These tactics required social skill to execute successfully. The emperor himself used banquets as occasions to manage political relationships. Inviting someone to a banquet signalled favour. Seating arrangements communicated relative status. Personal conversations with the emperor granted during the evening were carefully noted by everyone. The emperor's social interactions were tools of governance. Requests and petitions might be presented during banquets, though there were protocols about how this should be done. Direct formal petitions during the meal would be inappropriate, but a conversational mention of an issue, framed appropriately, might bring a matter to the emperor's attention in an acceptable way. The emperor's responses to these subtle requests were equally careful. A positive or encouraging response signalled that a matter would be considered favourably. A non-committal response indicated uncertainty. A negative or dismissive response communicated rejection of the petition or disfavour toward the petitioner. Competition among guests created tensions that had to be carefully managed. Rivals attending the same banquet needed to maintain civility. Despite their conflicts, open hostility would reflect badly on both parties and displease the emperor who expected proper behaviour at his table. Some emperors deliberately invited rivals to the same banquets, either to encourage reconciliation or to observe their interactions. These situations required careful navigation by the rivals, who needed to be civil without appearing weak, present without being confrontational. Status competition occurred subtly throughout banquets. Guests competed to demonstrate superior education through learned conversation, better connections through mentioning powerful friends, greater wealth through displays of jewellery and clothing, more sophisticated taste through commenting knowledgeably about wine or food. The emperor's favour was the ultimate prize in these status competitions. A guest who received obvious imperial attention gained status regardless of other factors. Being chosen for personal conversation with the emperor, receiving visible approval, being honoured through seating arrangement, all communicated high status. Observing the emperor's interactions with others provided information about current political standing. Guests noted who received imperial attention and who was ignored, who was seated near the emperor and who was distant. These observations helped guests understand the current political landscape and adjust their own strategies accordingly. Alliances formed at banquets sometimes lasted throughout careers. Personal bonds created over shared meals and wine became foundations for decades of political cooperation. Many significant Roman political partnerships began or were cemented at imperial banquets. The social skills required to navigate these complex dynamics were substantial. Success required reading subtle signals, understanding unspoken communications, managing multiple conversations and relationships simultaneously, saying enough to be interesting while avoiding anything controversial or offensive. Women's roles in banquet politics were complex. While women attended some imperial banquets, their political activities were constrained by gender norms. However, influential women could still exercise power through their connections, conversations, and the impressions they created. Imperial women, the empress, princesses, the emperor's female relatives, wielded particular influence. Their favour could advance careers and their disfavour could damage them. Guests cultivated relationships with powerful imperial women, as well as with the emperor himself. The political significance of imperial banquets meant that attendance itself was politically important. Being invited regularly confirmed your standing. Sudden exclusion signalled falling from favour. The invitation system became a mechanism through which political relationships were managed and communicated. Imperial banquets included various opportunities for the emperor to demonstrate favour through gifts and special gestures toward particular guests. These marks of imperial generosity were highly valued both for their material worth and for the status they conferred. The tradition of giving gifts to guests at banquets was ancient and widespread in Roman culture, but imperial gifts were particularly significant, combining material value with symbolic meaning. Receiving a gift from the emperor demonstrated his favour in visible, tangible form. Some emperors distributed gifts to all guests, creating a general display of imperial generosity. These gifts might be relatively valuable items like silver cups, jewellery, fine textiles, or objects of art even when given to everyone. Such gifts were treasured as souvenirs of the occasion and markers of having attended an imperial banquet. Other gifts were selective, given only to particular individuals whom the emperor wished to honour especially. These special gifts might be more valuable or personal than general gifts. Receiving a special gift from the emperor was a public honour that significantly enhanced the recipient's status. The gifts themselves varied enormously depending on the emperor's preferences and the occasion. Some emperors favoured practical items like fine tableware or useful objects. Others preferred luxuries like jewellery or art objects. The choice of gifts revealed something about the emperor's character and values. Books were appropriate gifts for emperors who valued culture and learning. A rare manuscript, a beautifully produced copy of a literary work or a collection of poems might be given to guests who were scholars or who appreciated literature. These gifts honoured intellectual pursuits while providing objects of lasting value. Jewels and jewellery were prestigious gifts that combined beauty with substantial monetary value. A ring set with a precious stone, a gold necklace, or similar items were treasured both as beautiful objects and as stores of wealth. Such gifts might be given to particularly honoured guests. Grants of money or land were the most significant gifts the emperor could bestow, though these were typically handled through formal channels rather than being announced at banquets. However, the emperor might inform a guest at a banquet that such a grant had been approved, using the social occasion to communicate this extraordinary favour. Some emperors gave extravagant or unusual gifts that became legendary. Stories circulated about emperors giving houses, estates, or even ships to particularly favoured guests. Whether such extreme gifts actually occurred or were exaggerated, they reflected the expectation that imperial generosity should be spectacular. The emperor might give gifts that referenced inside jokes or personal connections with particular guests. These personalised gifts demonstrated the emperor's attention to individual relationships and created special bonds between emperor and recipient. Receiving a gift from the emperor required appropriate response. Accepting the gift with expressions of gratitude and unworthiness, pledging loyalty and service, thanking the emperor profusely, all were expected. The response needed to be enthusiastic without seeming calculated or excessive. Some guests brought gifts for the emperor, though this required careful judgment. The gift should demonstrate respect and taste without seeming to be an attempt to buy favour. Books, artworks, or rare items from the guest's travels might be appropriate. The gift should be valuable enough to be worthy of presenting to the emperor, but not so extravagant as to seem presumptuous. The emperor's response to gifts received revealed his feelings toward the giver. Accepting a gift graciously and commenting positively on it showed favour. Accepting it without much comment suggested politeness without particular warmth. Having the gift set aside without examination communicated displeasure or indifference. Beyond physical gifts, the emperor could grant various forms of favour through words and gestures during the banquet. A public compliment from the emperor was itself a gift of sorts, enhancing the recipient's reputation and status. Being invited to sit near the emperor for part of the evening honoured the guest. The emperor might grant requests or promises during banquets, though these were handled delicately through conversation rather than formal petitions. A promise to consider a request favourably, to support someone's candidacy for office, or to approve some project communicated imperial favour, even without immediate material gift. Some gestures of favour were subtle, but significant to those who understood court protocols. The emperor choosing to drink a toast specifically with a certain guest, engaging that guest in extended conversation, or laughing at their jokes all communicated favour that enhanced the guest's standing. The cumulative effect of gifts and gestures during a banquet could significantly affect political relationships. A guest who received multiple signs of imperial favour during one evening would leave with enhanced status, while a guest who received little attention despite being present would feel the relative disfavour. Guests observed carefully who received gifts and favour, using these observations to understand the current political landscape. Someone who received exceptional imperial generosity was clearly in high favour and might be a useful ally. Someone who received nothing might be falling from power and should perhaps be avoided. The system of gifts and favour at banquets thus served multiple functions. It allowed the emperor to reward loyalty and service. It demonstrated imperial wealth and generosity. It communicated political relationships. And it created incentives for guests to seek and maintain imperial favour through appropriate conduct and service. Imperial banquets were lengthy affairs that often extended deep into the night or even into the early morning hours. The duration itself was part of the statement these events made. Time was so abundant, the emperor's leisure so important, that an evening could be devoted entirely to dining and socialising. The banquet typically began in the late afternoon or early evening, with guests arriving as the day was ending. This timing meant that the event spanned the transition from day to night, with the changing light and eventual darkness adding to the atmosphere. The meal portion of the evening, the gustatio, prima mensa, and secunda mensa, typically lasted 3 to 4 hours or even longer. This extended period reflected the leisurely pacing of service, the large number of dishes, and the time devoted to conversation between courses. The commissatio or drinking party that followed the meal could last even longer than the meal itself. Some drinking parties extended for many hours, with wine flowing, entertainment continuing, and conversations becoming progressively less inhibited as the night advanced. The overall duration of 5, 6, or more hours was common for imperial banquets. Some especially elaborate occasions lasted even longer, becoming all-night affairs that concluded only with the sunrise. The length itself demonstrated that the emperor and his guests had so much leisure that they could devote entire nights to pleasure. As the hours passed, the character of the gathering evolved. Early evening formality gradually gave way to increasing informality, as wine took effect and guests became more comfortable with each other. The conversations became franker, the laughter louder, the atmosphere more relaxed. Guests were keenly aware that they could not leave before the emperor indicated the evening was over. Departing early would be insulting, suggesting that the emperor's hospitality wasn't enjoyable, or that you had more important things to do. Only genuine emergencies justified early departure. The emperor himself determined when the banquet would end. This decision might be based on his energy level, his sense of the gathering's momentum, or simply his preference. Some emperors were known for especially long banquets, others for more moderate events. The signs that the evening was concluding were subtle at first. The entertainment might wind down. The flow of new wine might slow. The emperor might begin making remarks that suggested conclusion, rather than continuation. Experienced guests recognized these signals and prepared for departure. The formal conclusion might be marked by final toasts. The emperor might propose a concluding toast thanking guests for attending and wishing them well. Guests might respond with toasts to the emperor's health and prosperity. These final toasts created ceremonial closure to the event. As the emperor rose from his couch, signalling the evening's end, guests would also rise. The emperor's departure from the Triclinium was the clear signal that the banquet was over, and guests could now leave. Even then, the emperor departed first, with guests following after he had left. The departure process was managed to maintain appropriate hierarchy. The most distinguished guests departed earliest in the sequence, with lesser guests following. The palace officials who had managed arrival managed departure similarly, ensuring proper protocol was maintained. Guests retrieved their outer garments from attendants who had stored them during the banquet. This practical necessity created a brief period of organised confusion as dozens of guests all tried to reclaim their belongings and arrange their transportation home simultaneously. The litters that had brought guests to the palace returned to carry them home. The litter bearers, who had been waiting for hours, would carry their passengers back through Rome's now dark and quiet streets. The journey home provided time for reflection on the evening's events. Many guests were quite drunk by the time of departure. This was acceptable and expected. The commissatio was, after all, a drinking party. However, guests still needed to maintain sufficient composure to depart in relatively dignified fashion. Being carried to one's litter by servants was acceptable. Being violently ill or unable to stand was not. The night air and movement of the journey home helped sobering process begin. Guests might review the evening's highlights in their minds, considering conversations they'd had, connections they'd made, impressions they'd created, and how the evening might affect their future prospects. For guests travelling significant distances, arriving home might be in the very early morning hours. Servants would help them inside, help them undress from their banquet clothing, and assist them to bed where they would sleep off the wine and the exhaustion of the long evening. Some guests didn't go directly home but stopped elsewhere to continue socialising with companions they'd bonded with during the banquet. These post-banquet gatherings, smaller and more intimate than the imperial event, allowed for conversations that couldn't occur at the palace. The morning after an imperial banquet typically involved significant recovery time. The combination of rich food, abundant wine, late hours, and general excess left many guests feeling unwell. The day after a banquet was often devoted to rest and recuperation. During recovery, guests began processing the evening's significance. Conversations with family members, trusted servants, or close friends helped analyse what had occurred. The political implications were discussed. The status of relationships was assessed. The overall success or challenges of the evening were evaluated. Guests who had particularly successful evenings would soon find that news of their imperial favour spread. Others who had observed the banquet would talk about who seemed most favoured by the emperor, who received special attention or gifts, who seemed out of favour. These discussions affected reputations and political standing. For guests who had made mistakes or whose attendance was less successful, the post-banquet period involved damage control. They might need to send messages explaining misunderstandings, repairing relationships that were strained, or otherwise managing the consequences of the evening. The emperor himself received reports after banquets about guests' behaviour, conversations and interactions. These reports, provided by trusted advisors and servants who had observed the evening, helped the emperor understand his guests better, and informed future decisions about invitations and favour. Looking back across the full experience of attending a Roman emperor's banquet, certain themes emerge that reveal what these extraordinary events meant in their cultural and historical context. The banquets were far more than simply lavish meals. They were complex social and political theatre that served multiple functions. The overwhelming display of wealth and resources was certainly one function. Imperial banquets demonstrated the emperor's control over the empire's vast resources, foods from across 3 continents, entertainment of the highest quality, gifts of substantial value, all testified to imperial power made material. But wealth display was not the only or even the primary purpose. The banquets served crucial political functions, providing venues where the emperor could manage relationships with the empire's elite. The invitation system, seating arrangements, personal interactions, and distribution of favour all helped maintain the political networks that undergirded imperial rule. The social bonding that occurred at banquets created networks of relationships among the empire's powerful. These networks, formed and maintained through shared experiences at imperial tables, helped coordinate the empire's governance and military operations. Personal relationships among officials made administration more effective. The cultural display at imperial banquets reinforced Roman identity and values. The emphasis on proper Latin, appreciation of literature and philosophy, knowledge of Greek culture, all promoted the cultural sophistication that elite Romans valued. Banquets were venues for performing and reinforcing cultural identity. The emperor's individual personalities shaped their banquets significantly. Augustus's relatively modest and cultured gatherings differed vastly from Nero's theatrical extravaganzas, which differed from Trajan's military-focused events. The character of imperial banquets reflected and reinforced each emperor's particular style of rule. The experiences of attending these banquets varied for different guests based on their status, their relationship with the emperor, and their individual circumstances. A senator in high favour experienced the evening very differently than a newcomer to imperial circles, or someone whose political fortunes were uncertain. Women's experiences at banquets, when women were invited, differed from men's experiences due to gender roles and expectations. While women could certainly enjoy the food, entertainment and social aspects, their political activities were more constrained and their interactions governed by additional protocols. The contrast between imperial banquets and ordinary Roman dining was vast. While wealthy Romans hosted elaborate banquets in their own homes, even the finest private banquets couldn't match the scale, luxury and political significance of imperial events. Attending an imperial banquet was entering a different realm of experience. The historical sources that inform modern understanding of these banquets are varied and sometimes problematic. Ancient writers sometimes exaggerated for effect, emphasized scandalous or unusual elements, or had political motivations for presenting emperors in particular lights. Separating reliable information from exaggeration requires careful historical analysis. What seems clear from the available evidence is that imperial banquets were culturally important events that combined multiple functions. They were displays of power, venues for political management, occasions for cultural performance, spaces for social bonding, and simply very elaborate dinner parties where powerful people ate, drank, and socialized. The modern difficulty in fully understanding these events stems partly from cultural distance. Roman values, social structures, and daily life differed so significantly from modern Western experience that some aspects of their banquets seem strange or incomprehensible. Understanding requires setting aside modern assumptions and trying to see through Roman eyes. Yet across the cultural distance, some aspects remain recognizable. The social anxieties about making good impressions, the political maneuvering to advance interests, the pleasure in good food and drink, the enjoyment of entertainment and company, these are human experiences that transcend particular cultures. The night deepens. The story of the imperial banquet concludes. The Triclinium empties. The lamps are extinguished. The palace grows quiet. But the experience lingers in imagination. The vast hall glittering with lamplight, the laden tables, the reclining guests in their finest clothing, the emperor presiding over his empire's elite, the entertainment and conversation and wine, all combining to create one of history's most exclusive and elaborate social rituals. May this understanding bring appreciation for the complexity of ancient social life, for the ways that meals served purposes far beyond nutrition, the elaborate codes of behaviour that structured human interactions. May it provide perspective on modern gatherings and the continuities and differences between ancient and contemporary hospitality. May it bring recognition that power has always been performed through ritual and display, that social bonds have always been created and maintained through shared meals and experiences, that the fundamental patterns of human social behaviour persist across time, even as their specific forms change dramatically. And may it bring the comfort of knowing that across 2,000 years, the basic pleasures of gathering with others, sharing food and drink, enjoying entertainment and conversation, remain recognisable and meaningful, connecting the present to the distant past through the universal human need for community and celebration. Good night, and may rest come gently, perhaps dreaming of marble halls and laden tables, of wine and music and the company of interesting people, of a time long past but not entirely foreign, when an invitation to dinner could be a summons to history itself.